Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to another Chris Chan Quickie Reading. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we now have the fortunate honour of covering one of the most iconic characters in the Chris Chan story. That is of Clyde Cash, long since considered Chris's main antagonist and almost a staple of the early years of Chris Chan's history. And this one is possibly one of my absolute favourites, maybe up there with the likes of Liquid Chris and Alec Benson-Leary. But Clyde was just, he was just really, really good at pushing Chris's buttons, if that makes sense. So, let's get started, shall we? Note on misinformation. This article previously included information that was primary speculative or incorrect. This is being fixed for more, see information. Note on sock puppets. Clyde Cash has been known to use sock puppet accounts. Since it is difficult to discern their sock accounts, it is best to avoid speculation on an account belongs to Clyde Cash unless fully verified. Troll disclosure. I know there's a lot of things we're going to have to go in here, but, this persona was created, appropriated, or otherwise used by trolls to manipulate Chris. He was played by the same person behind Greg Mays, Vivian G, Brian Bash, Mao Ling, and Shigeru Miyamoto. Though this identity is contrived, the Quickie may treat it as though it's the real identity because it was to Chris. It's also funnier that way. Do you reckon Chris, years later, ever went to the Quickie to discover this? Because I don't really disbelieve the idea that Chris never went to this, but that could just be me talking. So, no, the goal was to make sure you never get laid. That is the goal of my miscreants. Clyde to Chris when introducing him to the miscreants. Dun dun dun. Your butt's gonna be in trouble. Barbara Chandler to... Okay, but yeah, fantastic rebuttal there, Barbara. That's fantastic. Clyde Cash, alias Greg Mays, that's Greg with 3 Gs, was born on the 4th of July 1976, apparently. He was the ringleader of the miscreants, and is often considered to be Chris's arch-nemesis. Even years after his trolling days were finished, in recent years, however, some have argued that people like the Idea Guys and Jacob Socrates have taken this position away from Clyde. Nonetheless, when people think of Chris Chan's greatest trolls, Clyde is usually chief among them. Usually due to the sheer volume of videos that Chris made denouncing or threatening his Guido rival, Clyde, in turn, played up being a heel to Chris, presenting himself as a comically diabolical mastermind, conspiring to inconvenience Chris wherever possible. Ironically, despite Chris's constant demonizing of him, and his own approach to trolling as playing the role of the mustache-twirling frat bro fiend, Clyde has warned him about several things that would later return to bite Chris in the ass. Such as his unwillingness to work, his bad spending and saving habits, his delusional thoughts, and his poor treatment of women. Now, it should be noted from this point onwards, Chris has proven many times that he never learns from any mistakes he's ever made, and genuinely does consider himself to be perfect. Maybe not in a literal sense, but Chris doesn't really seem to show any signs of development. He continues more or less the same as before, except maybe slightly different. And, well, it is true, sometimes, considering how many times Chris has been trolled in his life, you would have thought that somebody with Chris's baggage, we're going to call it, should have learned from these experiences, but no, nothing like that. Clyde also successfully summarized that Chris has an innate desire to dress like a woman because he wanted to become one himself. Not all of Clyde's trolling was malicious, however. He also attempted to try to use his trolling attempts to get Chris to understand some unpleasant truths to help him understand the error of his ways, similarly to his Vivian G persona, but it was to no avail. Multiple trolls, usually weens, utilized the alias of Clyde Cash during the classic era of Christery, but the original found the most success in getting under Chris's skin. As mentioned above, the original troll behind the Clyde Cash persona was also involved with a variety of other personas dedicated to trolling Chris, and at least one was active at any given time prior to the disbanding of the Miscreants. Clyde and his various proxies retired following the death of Bob Chandler, with no clear word about where the original troll went. Possibly, maybe he died with Bob or something like that. Prologue. The Clyde Cash saga is often considered one of the most memorable to observers. This is in part due to the sheer amount of activity from the troll, and all of the ways that Chris reacted to Clyde's efforts. The Clyde Cash saga included Chris's wishing physical harm on Clyde, several videos showing repeated attempts to blackmail him, a video where he compares his strength to the Twin Towers, videos involving the abuse of a clown doll, a video where Chris dons orange-brown face paint to impersonate his nemesis, the formation of a group whose sole purpose was to prevent Chris from getting a sweetheart, the stealing of several Chris's potential sweethearts, and a few comic appearances as a chrome-domed villain with a jetpack. Pro-trolling life. Or pre-trolling life, I should say. According to an obituary detailing his supposed death, before becoming the Guido nemesis of Chris, Clyde was a famed musician. Creating music for his brother Ryan following his death, Clyde has also been known for many years to adopt children and raise them, especially when adoption rates were low. Ryan's death. Footnote: Ryan Cash was not a real person, he was created to manipulate Chris. Ryan Cash was the fictional brother of Clyde, who committed S-word when Chris announced that there would be no more comics released, withholding Solitude issue 7. In protest of the Encyclopedia Dramatica page, he left the following note before K-wording himself. Dear family and friends, this is my final message to you. I am going to K-word myself after my hero Christian Weston Chandler let me down. Solitude was my hero, and without any more comics, I will never be able to aspire to be just like him. I hate Christian for deciding not to make any more comics and being lazy. All he does is play his stupid video game and not care about anything but himself. He's such a jerk. Goodbye forever. I hope to see you in hell, Chris. Ryan Cash. Clyde was absolutely heartbroken upon discovering his brother's cadaver and entered a state of depression. While Chris was upset by the news due to his naive understanding of the concept of death, his response to the news came across as condescending to a grieving Clyde, who was upset that the video wasn't dedicated to his brother, but various news items that were seemingly of more importance to Chris. The final straw was when Chris made a thoughtless comment indicating that he enjoyed having enough influence over someone, that they could K-word themselves after he took a course of action. That's something. Things like that deserve videos in themselves, but whole essays, I should say. But yeah, to be honest, I'm very. I don't even know. Let's just keep going. Trolling. Note: the Clyde persona was most associated with Christy was not played by multiple people. It was played by the same person who played Vivian G, Shigeru Miyamoto, Reggie Fils-Aimé, Brian Bash, Mao Ling, and many other personas. Several weens had ended up using Clyde's likeness to imitate him during the classic era. Following from Ryan's death, Clyde's grief transformed into righteous indignation, and he swore to avenge his fallen brother by setting himself on a path to become Chris's arch-nemesis, even if he had to become a monster to do so. Clyde achieved notoriety for his various trolling plans against Chris. The R-word of Panda Halo. The first plan involving the Clyde persona was to make Chris believe that Clyde had R-word his current sweetheart Panda Halo. Panda announced this revelation to Clyde in an IRC chat and told him that she was pregnant. Clyde repeatedly called her a liar. Despite Chris's initial shock of the revelation, he was still willing to forgive Clyde for this. I don't really think people should. And proposed that Panda get an abortion. Ultimately, Chris was unaffected by all of this and simply moved on to the next gal pal. Chris believes that Clyde married Panda and had a 1-cent daughter named Penny. Sonichu Girls. Clyde also created a fake group of female Sonichu fans known as Sonichu Girls. This group was co-founded by Sarah May, who previously white-knighted Chris in IRC chats he had with Clyde, and another gal pal named Cassie. The group was primarily made up of troll personas that were later used to catfish Chris, including Julia and Emily. Not much else is known about Clyde's involvement with the project, though the forum was later repurposed into a message board for trolls, many of whom were from the Miscreants. Julie. Always gives me chills whenever this part has to come up. Clyde once again baited and threatened Chris with Julie, a troll sona created by a 13-year-old troll that went by the name of Blue Spike. Blue Spike had set up a mumble chat in which Chris could communicate with true and honest Sonichu fans. He also operated under two aliases, Julie and Max Milvana, two siblings who came from the nation of Mulvania, luring Chris into various trolling plans with the Julie character and threatening Julie with the Max character. Clyde stalked Julie while infiltrating the mumble chats to confront Chris. He began throwing demands to Chris, such as cleaning his room or threatening Chris that he will harm Julie, unless he admits that he's gay, leading to unexpected results. Chris, at the same time, also bought Sonichu and Rosechew.com. Clyde got access yet again, this time with the help of Blue Spike. Clyde later acted as the founder and original leader of a made-up group called the Miscreants, a group of people who trolled Chris from early 2009 to 2011. Terminating the group following Bob's death, Clyde has claimed the original purpose of the group was to prevent Chris from finding a boyfriend-free girl, supposedly being a group that's been around since ancient times. They also claim to be responsible for many of Chris's past misfortunes, prophesizing that a man dressed up as a pickled cucumber would steal one of his sweethearts. When it was announced that Max had kidnapped Julie, Clyde later claimed on the 24th of February 2009, happy birthday to Chris, that he had plans to send Julie off to China in 9 hours, to which Chris responded that he would make his way to Ohio to save her. Of course, this effort proved fruitless, as the address he was given belonged to a run-down house owned by an elderly lady. After tinkering with the new Max character, Blue Spike prompted Chris to do things like shoving pieces of his medallion up his ass and telling him to say the N-word. This prompted Clyde to kick Blue Spike out of the Miscreants. In Chris's revised Encyclopedia Dramatica page, Clyde is referred to as a Starscream troll. This is a reference to the Transformers character Starscream, who would often switch sides or plot to overthrow Megatron behind the scenes. Chris says this because he believes Clyde had killed Blue Spike after he had been kicked out of the Miscreants. And for those who know, this is not even the last we even hear of Blue Spike anyway, but that's besides the point. Church audio and the hooker incident. During Chris's short break from the internet, very short I should say, Clyde sent out his trusted man in the pickle suit to scout out Chris's whereabouts. The MIPS turned Robert Simmons V into a troll and infiltrated Wesley Memorial United Methodist Church. From this, both MIPS and Robert discovered several more details about Chris's personal life, such as citing Family Guy as evidence that homosexuality is sinful, and that Rocky Shoemaker had encouraged him to continue reading How to Talk to Girls. Chris later went on a date with Emily at the Charlottesville Fashion Square. The MIPS then stole her from Chris, which then prompted Emily to declare to Chris that she would live with Clyde instead of him, and for Chris to publicly declare the MIPS association with Clyde. Clyde later claimed responsibility for the failed date in a call, which Chris followed soon after, providing him a group of escorts to help him with his love quest. Which is, I believe, what they refer to as foreshadowing. Harassment of Ivy. When Ivy came along, Clyde decided to continually harass her. He leaked information regarding her, which provoked Chris to threaten him. Despite this, Ivy eventually gave in and rumours circulated about her K-wording herself. PlayStation Network hacking. On the 22nd of May 2009, Clyde faked his death by self-inflicted shotgun wound to the head. This was later reported by the Miscreants. After Clyde faked his death for reasons unknown, he came back with a vengeance a week later. Yeah, Chris wasn't very pleased. No, I bet. as he had discovered that Clyde had made 2 purchases totaling at $15.98 after hacking into his PlayStation Network account. Chris attempted to contact Vivian G in order to pay back these transactions, but she claimed that she couldn't afford it. Ironically, a new foe would outperform Clyde in hacking into the account. But by this point, Clyde was relatively dormant and less active with Chris, only popping up occasionally, but despite this, Chris continually challenged Clyde to face him, and often blamed him for many of the misfortunes that followed. I get why Chris didn't think it would be a good idea if he just, went to his bank and said that, hey, look, these transactions aren't mine, and I have the proof to show that these things are not mine, and I did not make these purchases, but we'll never know. The return. In late 2009, when not battling Liquid Chris for the hand of Casey, Chris spent his time trying to convince Clyde Cash, alias Greg Mays, or Greg Mays, alias Clyde Cash, depending on which name he remembers first, to face him in a one-on-one battle. Chris has recorded several feats of strength through a combination of Casey trying to get him to get into shape and a desire to frighten Clyde with his bulging muscles. Is that what he calls them? However, because of the negative reaction to Sonic Truth Special 4, Chris, in the Wikipedia mailbag, made clear that he would only sit and talk cooperatively with Clyde to get him to stop harassing him. Despite Clyde's inactivity, he remained a common scapegoat of Chris's. For example, Chris directed blame at Clyde in December of that year when he discovered an interactive billboard that used a Photoshop image of him at a gay bar. Chris, however, later outed Forg for this endeavour during the Calling Out saga. Eventually, and I do mean eventually, Chris decided to revisit his old nemesis in 2010, believing he was the reason why he lost the wallflower. In it, he is shown fighting Clyde, then pulling a knife and slitting Clyde's throat as a warning to the trolls. Oh yeah, by the way, if you want to know what this is like, I'm just going to put this right here because this is one of the funniest videos Chris has made. I know deep down he didn't, it wasn't made to be funny, but this is just funny, this. I really.
You think I'm weak? You think I'm not tough? This is what happens when I'm intercepted. This is what will happen when I'm intercepted by a troll.
Hi, hello, Christian?
Hello?
What's the matter? You don't know me?
No, should I?
It's me, Clyde Cash.
Oh. What the hell do you want, you son of a bitch?
Oh, I just came by to tell you how much of a son of a bitch, lazy-ass, bigoted, treacherous rat you are. Oh, and how about that time I raped your sweet Australian panda bear? You son of a bitch!
What is he doing?
Come on, get up, you son of a bitch. This is for Sarah Cassandra McKenzie, you bastard. Watch your back, trolls.
You know, considering Chris's efficiency with a knife, we want to take it for granted that Chris never owned a gun. Shall we say that? Yeah, that's apparently Chris. That's Chris's warning, by the way, to the trolls. Somehow managing to lose at beating himself up. In another well thought out counter trolling plan, Chris unsuccessfully attempted to scam Clyde into paying $9,001 for destroying Chris's own PS3. This almost fail-proof scheme was however foiled thanks to Sir Shaktito's vigilance. and the fact that, well, it was they knew all along. Basically, the story was that Chris was using a troll alias called Jenkins Jinkies, and, well, because the trolls knew all this time that it was just Chris trying to get one over on them by pretending to be a troll who knew inside information about Chris. And then a bunch of other stuff happened involving some made-up stories Chris did, which, again, might be revealing more about Chris's, urges more than anything else. It's just, it didn't work, to say the least. Chris fights back. At this point, Clyde had R-word Panda Halo, threatened many of his other gal pals, and has been a general nuisance to Chris. Chris tried to fight back against Clyde Cash every time Clyde had intruded into his life. Threatening violence. I'm gonna strangle that Clyde Cash. I will punch his lights out. Like many trolls that Chris perceived as his enemy, Clyde was the subject of many threats of violence and death threats from Chris. Though, in comparison to how he's responded to other trolls, Chris appeared to be far more vitriolic towards Clyde. Chris was explicit about his desire to murder the troll. Chris stated a desire to do such things as strangle him, punch his lights out, or shove his ass down his throat to make him eat his underwear. Thankfully, Chris's threats to carry out these heinous acts never escalated to actual attempts. Chris made use of an old clown doll, treating it as an object to release his anger towards Clyde on. Chris filmed himself beating up the doll repeatedly, occasionally putting what he presumed to be Clyde's face over it. He attempted to tear up the doll repeatedly, but only managed to tear off its hat with his teeth. Upon Clyde's return, Chris declared that he would one day confront Clyde in a fight. Chris also tried to make Clyde appear weak in comparison to himself in several videos. In one instance, claiming that Clyde is weaker than water, Chris called Clyde out about the R-word of Panda Halo a year after the fact in a YouTube video when he came to believe that Clyde was responsible for the wallflower leaving him. In that video, Chris pretended to beat up Choke and then slit the throat of Clyde directly after he insulted him. Attempted doxing and blackmailing. Throughout their encounters, aside from threatening physical violence on him, Chris also attempted to fight Clyde by threatening that he would uncover his true identity, blackmail him, and report him to the authorities, a tactic which he had attempted several times after Clyde's return. In the video Secret Weapon, Chris claimed to have acquired the mugshot of Clyde, which is actually a photograph of Lee Hottie, giving it to him by the troll Lord Silly Nipples. Chris used the photo to represent Clyde in various videos where he threatens beating him up, typically placing it over the aforementioned clown doll, the first instance of which he actually uploaded a few hours before the declared unveiling Clyde's identity. A former troll turned White Knight informed him a month later that the picture he was given was not of Clyde. Despite it not actually being Clyde, the picture was circulated ironically, treating it as though the true picture of Clyde, and the image soon became a primary representation associated with the troll. In another video, Chris once again claimed that he was unable to figure out Clyde's true identity. In the video, Chris claimed that Clyde is actually a little kid who attends an elementary school in Frankfort, Kentucky. Despite this, Chris still threatened Clyde by telling others to report him to the Frankfurt police. Begs the question why doesn't Chris just do this, but there you are. Chris previously claimed that Clyde was actually a minor in other videos, including one where he mocked Clyde by singing over the Coolio and Kylan Mash song Gangsta's Paradise. Sometime before the 25th of October 2009, Chris obtained an alleged photo of Clyde Cash straddling a man in a Spider-Man costume. This one, by the way. In several videos, Chris hinted at possessing the photo to intimidate Clyde by using a cropped version of the image to represent Clyde. Chris threatened to blackmail Clyde by releasing the full image and covering it bit by bit, unless he left him alone, and he reveals his true identity by a deadline, while also referring to the costume man as the Itsy Bitsy Spider. In one particular video trolls persuaded him to make, Chris attempted to humiliate both Clyde and Jack Thaddeus, calling both of them weak by having the image take the place of the Twin Towers. Clyde did not stop, but Chris never returned the favour. And if you want to know what that was, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, well, let me demonstrate.
Well now, Mr. Clyde, your fame and fortune shall fall just like these twin towers. They go crumbling down with an airplane. You are weak. I'm the strong one. You are going down, Mr. Clyde Cash. Arr.
I mean, yeah, it is what it is. Surprisingly, it didn't work because of the backlash Chris received at this. Negotiation. Chris has stated in a few instances that he is willing to sit down and talk with Clyde cooperatively, but only if he chooses to stop harassing him, and declares Sonichu as his own work. I would say the parts where I communicate with him, similar to a father and son conversation. You may, as long as you make the written reference to me as Sonichu's original creator, with a statement like, Sonichu and all related material was originally created by Christian Weston Chandler. I would maintain a pleasant conversation with hopes of it not turning into an abusive conflict. I would not hit back unless he hit me first. Needless to say, this didn't work either. Calling out and insults. Hey, at least my head's not fucking orange, like a certain Cashy type person I know. Chris randomly calling out Clyde Cash in a video where he mimes making spaghetti. That video again needs its own discussion, but we'll get to that later, I promise you guys. Chris also called out Clyde on the various trolling plans that he had for him. In other instances, Chris resorted to insulting his enemy by mocking his appearance. One example of this is in a video where he paints his face orange, attempts to copy Clyde's stylistic hairstyle and his mannerisms. In that video, he called Clyde out all of the harm he has done on him, including the R-word of Panda Halo, and the supposed spreading of rumours to defame Chris. Another example is in a video where Chris is asked by Jackie to cook spaghetti in a video. Towards the end of the video, he clearly has microwave spaghetti and meatballs, which he then proceeds to stick his face into, giving his face an orangish colour. Chris remarks on this by mocking Clyde's appearance, saying how his face isn't fucking orange. Outstanding. In the comic, despite his prominence as the leader of the trolls and being the frequent object to Chris's scorn in his videos, Clyde's overall presence in the winding narrative of the comic is surprisingly smaller than you might think. In the context of the story, Clyde is just another villain working for Mary Lee Walsh. Given that his first appearance in a music video was illustrated well before Chris discovered the photograph of Lee Holly that he mistook for Clyde Cash's true appearance, Clyde is portrayed as a bold, red-eyed baddie with no beard and fair skin instead of freckled, tattooed dude bro with spiky hair, a headband, and a very thin beard across his chin. He also has a fabulous purple cape with a dapper suit underneath, rather than the typical Gideon attire. Clyde also has a jetpack, which he uses to regain his bearings after being hit with a Kamehameha attack. Strangely, Chris did not update the character's design in his few subsequent appearances after he discovered the truth of the Master's troll appearance, or much later when he drew a commission of himself making peace with the troll. Apart from capturing Ivy and getting into a fight with Chris, he initially only appeared on Quick music video for Holding Out for a Hero, officially Sonichu Special Number 1. Not much is known about Clyde, other than he lives in a mansion and owns a slander ray and a pickle gun, which allows him to technically represent the man in the pickle suit. He made his first appearance in the comic proper, Sonichu Issue 10, as the 4-cent garbage building.com is collapsing. When Jason Kendrick Howe escapes, he condemns Clyde and Jack Thaddeus for being homo trolls. When Beale escapes, he too condemns the two for their actions. saying that being homo trolls that are slandering and tarnishing an innocent man's good name is just as evil as being an assistant for Adolf Hitler. With no option left, Clyde and Jack jump into the 66+6-story elevator shaft to their deaths. Judging by Chris's commission, however, the death did not stick, although Clyde no longer serves as an antagonistic force in the widening narrative. For all that's worth. Retirement. The last time Clyde interacted with Chris was during Chris's campaign for Alex's lemonade stand, where Clyde donated $10 and shockingly commended Chris for doing something selfless for once. Notably, the comment on the Alex's lemonade stand page was the only time that Clyde interacted with Chris after the death of his father, as he and several other miscreants had agreed to leave Chris well alone after they decided that Chris had suffered enough, and that trolling him wasn't fun anymore. At some point after this, however, Clyde Cash felt that his brother Ryan had been successfully avenged, so he retired from his trolling career and moved back to New Jersey, where his wife Sarah and their daughter Penny could watch the sunrise over a grateful universe. He has not been seen on the internet, or at least Chris's corner of it, since then. Chris, surprisingly, has forgiven Clyde for what he has done, or at least he's stopped caring. In 2014, Chris drew art of him and Clyde making peace as part of a commission, albeit with both parties doing so somewhat begrudgingly. Notably, Chris completely screws up Clyde's height, making him appear to be much shorter than he was in the comics. In the September 2022 Discord Q&A Part 4, Chris said that of all the trolls, the one he would want to meet the most is the persona behind Clyde Cash, and by extension, Vivian G, Mao, Greg Mays, and Shigeru Miyamoto. Other aliases. Now, for reasons I kind of want to get into a little bit later, because these are going to be discussed separately, we're going to actually leave some of these. So I'll be covering the aliases in a separate video, just to keep things relatively consistent. But for all that's worth, ladies and gentlemen, that was basically the full story of the Clyde Cash persona. Somebody who just kind of did it for the lols and relatively decided to leave Chris well alone. And, well, it's kind of funny, actually, that even following the death of Chris's father, that actually Chris's life was relatively troll-free until people started making their way back in from at least, I want to say the idea, guys, so we're talking about middle of 2017. But it's kind of strange as well that, again, considering all the things that happened during the early days, it's staggering the fact that Chris just presents one and all that he does not learn a single thing about this. So that's that. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.